My name is Ron Carrico. I'm with the San Diego Air and Space Museum. Today is November the 17th, 2016, and I'm with Alfred M. Gordon, who is a command module pilot on Apollo number 15. He's here in town in San Diego today to be inducted into the San Diego Air and Space Museum Hall of Fame, and it's about time, I might say. Mr. Gordon has written two, or I should say Colonel Gordon has written 2 books.
3.
Wow, there's one more coming out, right?
Nope, I've written 3 already.
Oh no, well, okay, I was wrong.
Okay, first one was a book of poetry that I wrote, which has been published, and that's called Hello Earth, Greetings from Endeavor. Then I wrote a children's book, which I did with a fellow by the name of Fred Rogers, who had a very popular children's television show back in the day. And then the 3rd book was Falling to Earth, and we are now starting to work on the next book.
And Francis told me it's going to be great. He said he heard stories he'd never heard before. So
well, Francis is getting excited about it, I think, about writing this book. He was pretty excited about doing the last one, but I think now with the new book, I think he's getting excited because there are a lot of things that don't normally come up in conversation that I think you're gonna see in this book. So I think it'll be fun.
The Apollo mission and the moon, efforts to get to the moon are largely completely forgotten by most people. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, it was that guy. What was his name?" You know.
Yeah.
Buzz Lightyear, wasn't that he? You know, that sort of thing. And it really is sad. You've been a highly successful person, and it has a lot to do with your grandfather and your father.
Yes.
Can you tell us how that impacted you? Because you've been a hard-working guy all your life.
To be honest with you, Ron, I have made my own way since I was 12 years old. I started making my own money when I was 12. I pretty much single-handedly ran the farm, milked the cows, raised my own corn, went out in 30 acres of hay, and I mean, a typical small farm. Had a tractor that I used, and I'd be out there in the summertime all summer long. Before we got that farm, when I was younger, I used to go to my grandfather's farm and spend the summers with him. And he probably had more influence on me than even I kind of give him credit for.
And your grandfather's farm was pretty much without electricity, wasn't it?
It was what?
Without electricity. I mean, it was pretty much...
Oh, no. It was a pioneer farm. No electricity, no plumbing. They had an old hand-crank telephone with 6 other people on the line and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
There's no indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse, which in the middle of the winter was kind of tough because we had to walk about 100 feet to get to the outhouse in the middle of the winter. But what I learned from him, I think kind of always stuck with me, and that was a sense of responsibility, a sense of taking care of those things that are dependent on you. In his case, it was mostly farm animals, but that also applies to people and all kinds of other things too. You develop a sense of responsibility for the people that report to you.
So you excelled in high school.
I wasn't even in high school yet when I learned all that.
But you did excel in high school, which allowed you to get a scholarship to college and eventually go to West Point, the Army Academy.
Well, that's right. What happened, high school, I did well in high school. I was okay. I was student body president and had good grades and had a very loyal high school principal to me, who was almost like a second father. Earl Holman was a wonderful man. He was the principal of the high school, and he worked with me to get a scholarship.
What was the college? The college you first went to for the first year?
University of Michigan.
Okay. And then, but you were actually from Jackson, Michigan.
Yeah, I'm from Jackson, which is about 30 miles away from the university.
So now you get into the West Point, the academy.
Well, got a scholarship to Princeton, as a matter of fact. I was awarded all expenses paid scholarship to Princeton. And about 2 months before graduation, Princeton, in going over my records, saw that I had never taken any Latin in high school, and they required that as part of their scholarship deal. So that scholarship went away, and my principal then scurried around and got me a 1-year scholarship to the University of Michigan. So I went over there, but I was more into music than anything else. So I had played the piano all the way through school, In fact, I played in a band on weekends, and I was going to pursue music. But I realized that year that my parents really couldn't afford to continue supporting me in college. There were 6 of us children in the family. My dad worked in town, but we were not wealthy by any means. We were sort of middle class, if you will. But there wasn't enough money in family coffers to send anybody to school. If we were going to go to college, we had to do it on our own. So, in talking to a classmate of mine at school, and his father, his older brother had gone to the Coast Guard Academy. So I talked to his dad, and he said, you know, this is your way out. I mean, it doesn't make any difference which academy you go to, but apply for all of them. And if you get into one, you're golden, because it won't cost your folks any money to send you to school. So I did. My dad and I went down to our local congressman and talked to him, and he said, look, I will help you any way I can, but you're going to have to do it in a competitive exam throughout the state of Michigan. So I took the competitive exam, and the upside of that was I got an appointment to West Point from Senator Vandenberg back in the day.
So, and you've probably been to his Air Force base since then.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I knew his son.
So so you go to Academy, and at that time, you graduated in 55?
55, right.
And then you chose the Air Force over the Army.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's relevant.
Well,
so many people I've talked to that are your age, flew with barnstormers, are always wanted to fly.
Yeah, yeah.
And you was sort of like, oh, that's cool.
Well, I have to tell you, I chose the Air Force for probably the wrong reasons. I had 2 tactical officers at West Point that became very close to me. I thought maybe promotions would be a little better or something like that, but I hadn't thought that much about flying. That happened when I went to flight training.
So you graduated in which class?
Flight training, 64C, or
No.
57, I'm sorry, 56, I think it was 56C.
You're the first person I've ever asked that didn't just go like that. Everybody.
I don't remember.
Isn't that funny? Well,
maybe that's a function of age, Ron.
Well, you've accomplished an awful lot of things. You've accomplished a lot. I mean, an incredible amount of things.
Well, it kind of all started with flight training.
And you did well in that because you got a fighter on a flight training.
Oh yeah. Well, I had an instructor. I don't remember this in the book. My call sign for my instructor. Okay. I had an instructor. It was Old California Eastern Company. It was a contract training school.
Right. Yeah, that guy you didn't like very much.
Well, his call sign was Bendix.
There you go.
Because he washed out a lot of students.
Yeah, right. There you go.
I suppose that had something to do with it. Anyway, what I found was that he was yelled at us and honest. He was honest all the time. And I got to the point where I could do whatever I needed to do with him yelling in my ear. Not that I would ignore him, but that I just realized that he was putting stress on me I didn't need, and so I kind of ignored it. I started doing instrument training. I found that was my ticket. I really loved to fly instruments. And I think part of that was that he was a totally different instructor flying instruments. Never raised his voice. Always calm, slow, do this, do that. Never got angry, and I just fell into it. It just came so naturally to me. So when I graduated from flight training, I went in all-weather fighting, all-weather fighters.
You went into 86Ds.
86Ds, yeah.
And not a DC.
I went down to Tyndall for all-weather training,
Yeah.
and we flew 86Ds down there. Yeah. I had an instrument ticket that allowed me to land 00.
Wow.
That was pretty unusual back in those days, because the only thing we had to get into a runway was GCA.
You know
We didn't have ILS.
You know they don't teach GCA at pilot training anymore?
I would imagine.
I can't. Okay, the other day we had a super moon.
I heard. I didn't see it.
You didn't?
Missed it somehow. I forget now why.
Oh, wow. Well, at any rate, I mean, you can still see that it's larger than usual.
Did it look big?
Oh, yeah. And bright. I think it was at 216,000 miles, and And you've been,
Well, it's his closest approach because that's why it becomes a supermoon.
yeah, and that since 1948. So
There's an eclipse coming up next August too, but it'll hit up in Oregon.
So now that you're as close as you've been since 1971, what are your reflections on being there in 1971, in July and August of 71?
Well, June and July, basically we lived at the Cape, at Kennedy Space Center. We just trained all day long, and kind of interesting because we went into quarantine a month before the flight, and I guess you know the story about the quarantines. They put the first crews, like 11 and 12, in quarantine after the flight because they were concerned about bacteriological contamination coming in from outer space that crews would bring back with them. That was a Carl Sagan issue. He was the chairman of the Bacteriological Contamination Committee, and he used to come in and give us these long lectures about, you know, the dangers and what could happen and this, that, and the other thing. But it was all so funny. And I give you an example. We went into quarantine after the flight, those first two flights. Why? Well, because, you know, we've got to worry about the bugs. Well, how long is quarantine? 21 days. Why 21 days? Why do you put them in quarantine for 21 days? Well, kind of, that's the period that we would see something happening here on Earth. And the issue is, well, yeah, but we're talking about something that's not from Earth. We're talking about something that's from, so how do you know 21 days? Well, we don't, but that's our best shot. The other thing was they wash the spacecraft down with iodine when it gets in the ocean. And you say, why iodine? Well, because that kills all Earth bugs. So, well, what if it's food for some bugs that we might be bringing back from somewhere else? Anyway, it's all kind of funny. And so we ended up going in quarantine a month before the flight, not because of bacteriological contamination, but because Ken Mattingly had been taken off Apollo 13 because they suspected he had the German measles, and they wanted to make sure that that month before the flight, we didn't catch something that was going to take us off the flight. So we went in
now, when
quarantine.
you were back up on 12, were you put in quarantine as well?
No, we didn't. No, the quarantine on 12 was after the flight, as I recall.
Okay.
We didn't have quarantine before the flight, but we did on 15. We had it before the flight.
So now that the training you received, you were really instrumental in developing the Apollo spacecraft itself. Because if people don't remember, I'm sure, but Apollo 1 we had a fire in the Apollo, and 3 astronauts were.
Yeah, what happened in '67? We had to fire Apollo, what they call Apollo 1, where we lost Gus and Ed and Roger. They formed a group to go back and re-engineer the inside of the spacecraft. Basically for the flammability, that's what we were looking at.
And you are an engineer.
Oh yeah.
So that's why you became instrumental in this.
Yeah, there were two of us, Jack Swigert and I were the two that spent basically a year and a half at Rockwell and Downey going through all that. Redoing all the materials, looking at all the malfunction procedures. We did a lot of work in that year and a half.
Tell me the truth. Was the coolest part of the job having your own T-38 to go back and forth?
That is the coolest thing in the world. That is the one thing I remember with such fondness about the program, because I could call the flight line and say, I need to go to Detroit. I need a T-38. And the only response I get is, when do you want to go? And I'd say, well, I'll be out in about an hour.
That one,
gorgeous airplane, gorgeous.
One thing you said, you indicated in the book that you go up and do acrobatics and do spins with it, but
no,
you can't
never did spins in a 38.
No, you can't do spins in a 38.
No, you can't.
When I read that, I went, you can't do spins.
I don't recall saying that in the book, but yeah.
It's sort of like,
we did acrobatics, yeah. We did that before the flight.
Oh, of course.
And we did that because we wanted to train our inner ear. So we did all kinds of unusual positions in a T-38 as best we could to kind of shake up the inner ear, because we knew that when we got into space we didn't have gravity working on it. We're going to have to be conscious of what the inner ear is telling us with respect to stability. And I think it helped. I think it did help us.
Now, talking to Rusty Swiker, of course, he had the unfortunate experience of getting sick, getting airsick. And he told me that about 40% of the people that go into space get sick. And even after they fly on the vomit comet and all that sort of business, they still have problems.
Yeah, I couldn't verify that. I don't know if it was 40%, but Rusty did get sick in space. Other guys had problems in space, but no, I don't know of anybody that got sick like Rusty did. And his was more what I would call motion sickness that he couldn't control.
He said what happened was he was fine for the first 3 days, but as soon as he put on the suit, then he was in trouble.
Yeah.
And over the night, when he was out where he couldn't talk to anybody, they were thinking, I think I can do it. You know, him and was it McDivitt talked about it, and he said, you know, I think I can do it. So we got out because he knew that they weren't going to meet the mission.
Well, you know that Rusty became a guinea pig.
Yeah, for 6 months, the worst 6 months of his life.
Yeah, and he never would fly again either.
You named your ship.
Yes.
Endeavor.
Right.
Why?
Okay. We, as you know, the crew has responsibility of naming the 2 spacecraft and picking their own crew patch. The Lunar Module was easy. We named that the Falcon after the Air Force mascot. The Command Module was a different issue, and we were really looking for names, and most of the really good names had been taken. Well, I had a geology instructor named Farouk Elbaz, who is one of the world's great people.
Well, you talked about a lot in your book.
Oh, he's a wonderful, and still a very good friend of mine. And you probably know his story. He came over from Egypt. He actually defected from Egypt back in, I guess it would have to be the 60s, because he had married an Irish girl when he was going to MIT, and the Egyptian government wouldn't recognize the marriage. And so they went through this and that and the other thing, and they conscripted him, put him in the army, and sent him out to the Sinai to teach the troops. He was a petroleum engineer. And Pat went back to Boston where they had started, and he eventually, okay, so he went to Heidelberg to give his lecture, but instead of going back to Egypt, he got on another airplane and went to Boston. So he was in Boston. He worked for Bell Labs as a geology instructor, and he was basically my geology instructor, but he was a lot more too. I mean, he was my friend and everything.
Did he suggest Endeavor then?
What happened is he was coming down to continue with the geology training with me, and he came through Washington National. It used to be National, it's now Reagan, but it used to be National. And he was just kind of looking in the store, and he saw this book on old explorers, the picture book. So he picked it up and looked through it and thought maybe that would be something that we ought to talk about. So he brought it down, and we went through it, and here is Captain Cook's ship Endeavor, which he used to sail to the South Pacific for the first scientific voyage to the South Pacific. Considered the first scientific voyage. Apollo 15, we considered the first scientific voyage to the moon. So that was a perfect name. So that's why we used it.
So Endeavor is spelled with English spelling.
Yes, that's why.
And then after that, in honor of Apollo 15, they named one of the shuttles Endeavor.
Well, I don't know whether it's in honor of Apollo 15 or not, but yes, they did name one of the shuttles.
Cook, at least.
Yeah, and they spelled it the same way, so there was a connection. Although if you talk to shuttle guys, they probably don't know that we started that name. A lot of them don't.
Too bad Captain Cook met his end in
yeah, you know, why was it?
Hawaii, yeah.
Well, they got him the second time he came.
Yeah.
He was there the first time.
Well, they thought he was a god, and then they tried to see if they could kill a god. But at any rate.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the crew positions. I never can quite understand. It seems like everybody wants to have the name pilot attached to it. The commander, David Scott. The colonel.
Right.
The lunar pilot was James Irwin. Lieutenant Colonel James Irwin.
Right.
The late, I should say.
Yeah, right.
And apparently a great guy.
He was. We were office mates for a long time. He was a really close friend.
And then, of course, you were the command module pilot.
Right.
So, when you look in the cockpit of the Apollo, we have an Apollo 9 at the museum. You know?
Right.
And there's 3 seats.
Yeah.
Who sat where?
I sat in the left seat, Dave sat in the center seat, and Jim sat in the right seat.
Now, in your book, at one point you mentioned sort of changing seats. Did I misunderstand that?
Well, what happens, the way we arranged this whole thing, Dave sat in the left seat during launch.
There you go.
I sat in the center seat,
There
and
you
then
go.
Jim was over there.
Right.
As soon as we got into orbit, Dave and I switched seats.
Now, the reason why, I mean, you mentioned that he had his hand on the abort switch.
Yeah, and we did everything we could to prevent him from using it. Oh yeah.
So when you actually fly the thing, it is, to a certain extent, it is flyable. The Apollo.
Oh yeah. Oh
I mean,
sure.
You can,
You just don't have any aerodynamics working on it.
right. And when you're coming back, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. I really want to do it chronologically,
Okay.
but I can't. I just can't resist. I don't want to forget to ask. There are
Okay.
rear view mirrors in the thing. Rear view mirrors? You can see them. I mean, what are they there for?
Rear view mirrors. What do we have rear view
I got
mirrors
a picture of them. It's like I saw those things. I what in the world are those things for?
for? Rear view mirrors. Were they outside? Inside?
No, they're inside. They're in the cockpit. They're fairly large too.
I don't. Huh. That's a good one because you got me. You got me cold. I don't know. I don't recall any rear view mirrors.
But when you go
We
down
might
there,
have had mirrors.
there's two controls. There's one on the left and one on the right of the pilot seat.
Right. There's a translation control on one side and an attitude controller on the other side.
Yeah, this is a picture of the mirror here. It doesn't. It's kind of hard to see what it is. It's that square thing. It looks like it's set up here. I think there were two of them in the cockpit.
Somebody added that. That wasn't in our. We didn't have those. Somebody at the museum put that on. Well, look at the arm that holds the mirror. I mean, that's not something that we would have in a spacecraft. See how thin that is?
One of the things that's impressive to me, it's not just impressive, it's ridiculous, is the performance of this thing. In 9 minutes, you're 400 miles downrange after takeoff. 9 minutes and 21 seconds, 367 miles downrange at 38-mile altitude.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's kind of misleading though, because you start out zero. When we lifted off, we didn't even know we were off the ground. Launch control had to tell us. It took us 12 seconds to pass the launch umbilical tower.
And the reason why?
We're so heavy. We're the heaviest launch in the program. I don't know what the actual launch weight was, but I know it was over 6 billion pounds.
It was 6 million pounds, what I read, and it was at about 7 million pounds of thrust.
7.5 million pounds of thrust, right?
And burning fuel at the rate of,
18,000 pounds per second.
really, I've read 29,000 pounds, but 18,000.
Well, I've always heard 18, so it could be 29 for all I
Well, a
know.
lot.
There's a lot of fuel. The fuel lines in that thing were 18 inches in diameter.
They said here to fuel to parking orbit was 3.4 million pounds.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. It takes a lot of fuel to get that thing up. And our parking orbit was very low. We only went to 95 miles. See, all the others before us had gone to like 120, 130, something like that.
When you okay, that was actually was it the
We
third?
didn't have enough fuel on board to go any higher.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that helped you have more payload on the moon.
Well, that was the whole point because we
Yeah.
had the rover and we had the sim bay and a lot of heavy stuff that we carried.
The amount of G-forces accelerate as you accelerate it up. You finally up to 4.5.
Well, you start out at 1, and as you burn out fuel, of course, you get lighter, and the thrust is still the same, so you accelerate. And at the end of the first stage burnout, we're doing about 4.5 Gs. And they're x-axis Gs, so
Right.
it's no big deal.
But what was interesting to me, reading your book, where you guys were all interviewed within a couple weeks after landing, was the vibration wasn't as bad as some people expected.
That's right.
But the separation was.
It was a little different. We had been told a separation sequence, which was not the way it was in real life. Separation sequence was supposed to be thing shuts down, explosive bolts release the first stage, and retro rockets pull it back. In our case, the retro rockets fired after the shutdown. Retro rockets fired, so we're going 4.5 Gs one way to half G the other way.
Yeah,
Kind of kind of a surprise for Gemini.
Well,
But it wasn't for Dave.
You know, Bill Anders lives in town here. I've
Yeah,
never
oh yeah.
I've never
Bill's a
inter-
classmate of mine, by the way.
Well, yeah, yeah. And
Except he went to the Naval Academy and I went
Yeah.
to West Point. But we went through flight training together. Yeah, we've been friends since 1954. Bill would only do interviews to be a nice guy. He doesn't need it. He doesn't want it. He's very, very comfortable in the life that he has.
Well, one thing I thought was really interesting, and this relates to what we were just talking about, is he said that when the first stage shut down, his arms flew up like that, and when the second stage lit, he hit his face shield with his hand and he broke the shield. So Rusty Swikert said when they got in and strapped in, they really tightened them down. And so he and was it Collins? Was that who was with him? They loosened their straps.
Oh, he and Dave Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when they loosened their straps, yeah, Scott. When they loosened their straps up, as soon as the first stage shut down, they about hit the instrument panel.
Oh, well, we had the same thing. Yeah, Gemini.
And then he said, but then I said, well, then I told him what Aldrin had said, and he said, man, he never told us that.
Well, we got the same thing from Dave. Dave said, geez, guys, I forgot to tell you about that.
Yeah. But Swikert said that he thought part of it was that the fuel canister basically collapsed about 8 inches and basically acted like a spring because the fuel cells were all empty by then.
I don't know about that. I think when you go from 4.5 Gs to 0, something's going to happen, and you're
Okay, so now you'd never been in space before, but you'd been you've done a lot of 0G work. So what is it actually?
And you know, I hold the record for the most 0G parabolas.
Really? Mm-hmm. Maybe, we do have time. A parabola is KC-135.
KC-135, a guy by the name of Harry Andonian, who was an Air Force pilot, test pilot out of Wright Pat. They came down to the Cape, and we were going to do some procedures that I wanted to do, and had to do with bringing the canisters back in, the film canisters. So we got in a KC-135, and we...
Maybe you better explain that.
Okay.
On the way back from the moon.
On the way back, this side of the moon, on the way back from the moon, I did this spacewalk or extravehicular activity, and that was to recover the film canisters from the 2 large cameras we had in the service module. We had to practice that particular event, and we did it in the 0G airplane. So we all loaded in the airplane at Patrick, and we started doing parabolas, and we got up to 50 or 60, and everybody's saying, well, that's enough, let's go home. And I said, no, I want to do it a little bit more. And along about 80, Dave Scott says, I think it's time for us to quit and go home. And I said, no, please, Dave, I got to do some more. So we kept going and going and going. We ended up doing 120. As a matter of fact, there is a photograph of the KC-135 on the ground with the whole crew in a big flag out in front that says 120 parabolas.
I'll see if I can find it.
And I got it from him, and I may have a copy of it.
So what is it? Now, I mean, almost all of us Earthlings are familiar with falling off or jumping off of a diving board, that feeling of floating for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare with actually being in space?
Well, the difference is that when you get in space, it's continuous. You just have to live with it 24/7 in space. Diving off a diving board, you're going to hit the water. Doing a 0G airplane, you got maybe 25, 30 seconds of it, but you very quickly come back down to 1G. In space, it's just there all the time, and you have to get kind of used to it.
When you first get up, you're first in orbit. I mean, I think the first thing you're probably going to do is look out the window and go, wow. But after that, well, you're still strapped in, though.
Well, as soon as we got in orbit and the thing shut down, we unbuckled and got to a window so we could look out.
And you're feeling, Joe Engel described it, feeling this full feeling.
You know what, I didn't really notice it so much then. That feeling does come on to you, though, that, you know, it's funny. We rely on gravity for so many things. We don't even really think about it very much. But an example is, how do you know when you're hungry? Well, it's because the weight in your stomach gets lighter and lighter and lighter as the food gets digested. And eventually you hit a trigger point where the stomach says, I'm hungry. We go to sleep at night. Very simply put our head on a pillow, and the thing that keeps it there is gravity. So we have gravity that does so many things for us that we kind of don't think about how it would be without it. But when you get in space, now you have to consider all that, and it's great fun. I had a terrible time going to sleep the first night because I couldn't stop my head from wandering around.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I thought you had some sort of a cocoon body bag. Or
No. We had a sleeping bag that came up to the neck, and your head's out. I ended up having to put my head where the shoulder was in the bag to stabilize my head so I could go to sleep the first night.
Now, well, as soon as did you do one orbit of the Earth, or?
We did like 1.5. We went around once, and then when we came around Hawaii the second time, then we fired off and went to the moon. Started off.
And so in the meantime, and that's prior to that, is when you had separated and taken the LEM out. And
No. We still had the LEM with us then.
Really?
The LEM was still in its shroud. We were all one vehicle. The command module, service module, shroud, and S4B were all tied together. We fired up the S4B and started on our way to the moon, and that's when I undocked and pulled the LEM out. We did not do that in Earth orbit.
So that was your job?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, because you are the commander.
Well, I'm doing all the flying at that point from then on.
But now you and Scott were basically, he was trained to do both, right? Operate.
Well, that's why, yeah. Well, see, in the program back in those days, to become a commander, you really needed to be a command module pilot first, because then you only got one vehicle to learn,
right.
One additional vehicle. That's why it's tough to put an LMP in as commander like Gene Cernan, because he's got to learn both. And that was the one thing that caused Jim McDivitt to resign as the project manager. He didn't like that. Every other commander was a command module pilot first. So that was professionally, that was the way to advance through the program.
So if the program had gone through Apollo 25, you would have been the command pilot.
Could have been.
Could have been, yeah. Well, it seems like you were real popular with everybody, and and you certainly get the job
except for the little cover incident that we had, which killed everything.
Yeah. Someone I've been asking people, what would you ask an astronaut? I like to know. So my wife said this morning, I wonder if he still dreams about it.
No, I don't so much. My head is in a different direction these days. I think about it. If I see the moon up there on a nice clear night, I'll sometimes think about it. You look at the dark basins that face the Earth from the moon, and you think about all that. But basically, I'm more into these days giving thoughts to what is the space program really all about.
Let's go there in a little bit. Okay, let's get there in a little bit.
Okay.
But right now, let's talk about you're going to the moon. Exit velocity is some 25,000 miles an hour.
Right.
The moon has gravity too, and as you accelerate away, as you go away from Earth, you're actually decelerating for a while until you kind of get over the hump.
You are in a very high elliptical orbit around the Earth, and the apex of that ellipse is inside. Well, it's at a point where the moon's gravity becomes greater than the Earth's gravity. So instead of pulling us back, the moon's gravity pulls us.
And that crossover is about
2/3 of the way. I never really figured it out exactly, but I'd say 2/3 to 75% of the way.
Wasn't there some discussion of what's out there at that place where the gravity is balancing? Is there dust and clouds?
Oh yeah. You're talking about Legrange Points. There are 5 Legrange Points. 3 of them are on a line between the center of the Earth and the center of the moon. 2 of them beyond the Earth. 1 beyond the Earth, 1 beyond the moon, and then 1 in the middle. Then there's L4 and L5. L4 and L5 are off about 60 degrees from the Earth. If you were to draw a line to the moon, 60 degrees off that, there are L4 and L5. Now always has been kind of a big group of people that formed the L5 Society in this country. A guy by the name of Gerard O'Neill, Jerry O'Neill, who's a professor at Princeton, started this thing years ago. And it's because of of the gravitational effects of the Earth and the Moon and the rotation of the Moon around the Earth, and it takes in all the gravitational effects. Those L4 and L5 are positively stable points. If you were to put something in there, it would stay there forever. You could push it and it would come back. So it's a positive equilibrium spot. Be a great spot to put a space station, because you would never have to worry about lowering or raising its orbit or moving it around or doing anything. It'd be there forever. That's the L5 point. That's Legrange point number 5.
So now as you're approaching the moon, and you had to slow down. So you use the service module engine
Correct.
to slow down.
Correct.
A lot or a little?
We had we had to reduce our velocity by about 3,000 miles per hour.
Okay.
So that's a pretty big jump. So yeah, we went. In fact, what was funny about that run is that we went into the moon back. We never saw the moon.
Yeah.
We went in backwards, and it's at that point where you're about to go behind the moon. You say, "Boy, I sure hope Mission Control got this right," because we're only 60 miles away.
Yeah.
And after 250,000 miles, 60 miles is not very much.
Yeah.
So you say, well, yeah, I sure hope they got it right.
Hundredths of a percent of an angle.
Oh yeah, yeah, very tiny.
So when you're actually going to the moon, do you have to lead it like you would shooting at a bird?
Absolutely.
So
You got to lead it by about 4 days worth. So it's 1/7 of its total trip around the world. So that's about a little over 20 degrees.
okay.
So you got to lead the moon. When you leave Earth's orbit, you got to lead the moon by, it's just a quick off the top of my head thing, by about 20 degrees.
So now when you actually arrive at the moon, you go into an orbit, and the orbit time seems to be about the same time as going around the Earth.
It's a little longer. It's 2 hours.
2 hours.
2 hours, almost 2 hours exactly.
Now that makes.
And here on the Earth, it's about an hour and a half.
But that I'm trying to figure that one out. Why does it take longer? You would think it would be shorter because it's a shorter.
Because your orbital velocity at the moon is about 5,000. Around the Earth, it's 17.5. So around the Earth, you take the circumference of the Earth, which is 24,000 miles, and you divide 17.5 into that, and you got about an hour and a half.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Right.
On the moon, and I haven't figured out the circumference of the moon, but it turns out that at 5,000 miles an hour, you go around it once every 2 hours.
Now your job.
Which tells me that the circumference of the moon is 10,000 miles.
So your job was to run various and sundry experiments.
Yes.
You had a 24-inch panoramic camera, U2 camera basically, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a camera that was designed back in the 50s for the U2 program.
And you said in the book that you could see a rocket 3 feet in diameter.
Oh, I could see.
You probably
unbelievable camera.
Yeah.
I have some pictures of the lunar rover that I took with the panoramic camera. Yeah.
Someone set up a U2 camera on the opposite side of Coronado and took pictures back at the city. And you could see the pictures on the wall in the office buildings and see what they were.
Oh, I know. There's some good cameras out there. It was kind of interesting because back in those days we didn't have any digital cameras.
Right.
So it all had to be film, and that was one of the film cameras. And then there was the mapping camera, which is as I recall, it was like a 4 or 5 inch.
It says 3 inch. That's what I'm looking at.
3 inch?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be 3. I forget now. There's a lot of the fine details are kind of gone from my mind now, but it had a laser altimeter that recorded the altitude above the surface in the center of the picture.
What was the lowest altitude you went to?
We got down to about, I'm going to say somewhere around 24,000 feet.
Whoa, that's not much higher.
But that doesn't really. That's only half the story, because we had to fly over a mountain that was 15,000 feet high.
Yeah.
So we were really like 9,000 feet.
Did you map that? Was your cameras on at that time?
Oh no, we did that because we wanted Dave and Jim to be as close to the landing site as we could get them, so that they would have more fuel at the end to maneuver. So, see, the lower I drop them off, then the less fuel it takes for them to get down.
So did you drop them off that low then?
Well, the orbit was such. Yeah, I think we dropped them off somewhere around the side of the moon, but they were still in that low orbit.
It's one of the things. Kind of aside is, talking to Joe Engel about the speed reduction to come out of orbit in the space shuttle was like 300 feet per second. It's hardly anything. I was surprised. They just back off a little bit.
Oh, it doesn't take much. When you're in Earth orbit, it doesn't take much.
Yeah.
Because you're coming down enough in the atmosphere where the friction in the atmosphere really slows you down rather quickly.
Now, if you would have,
See, we didn't have that problem. We didn't have to slow down. We came back, when we hit the atmosphere, we were back up to 25,000 miles an hour.
right. And when you were orbiting the Earth, I was just thinking, I mean, you stayed pretty much around the equator of the moon, correct?
No. No, in fact, we had the highest inclination trajectory at the moon of anybody.
Well, they were up pretty high. They were up at 10 degrees north or something like that.
We were 27.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, we were very high.
Could you have orbited the Earth from pole to, or the moon from pole to pole?
No, we didn't have enough fuel to make that kind of a correction. But
Just like,
if we had gone in that way, we could have. I mean, if that were all decided before we got there, absolutely.
and you would have had the Earth in sight the whole time.
It depends. If we were going, no, we wouldn't do that either. We would be probably going around the moon in the same plane as the moon and the Earth. It all depends. I've never even thought about it really, but it depends on how much fuel you got on board, how big a correction you can make.
So now you were 3 days by yourself, and you were really busy.
Very busy. In fact, I worked probably 20 hours a week, a day.
Wow.
And it was kind of nice because I could really get stuff done quickly because I didn't have those two guys getting in my way.
Well, in that the amount of space is unbelievably small. I mean, how many cubic feet do you have? Maybe 300?
No, we had 220.
220. That's but just in the module, just in the command module.
Right.
And then the LEM was
even smaller.
yeah.
It's like 100 and maybe 175 in LEM. I don't think I've ever heard exactly how much cubic footage there was in the LEM, but we had like 220.
Now,
Well, the Gemini had 75 and Mercury had 45. So
I think it's actually kind of, we probably should have talked about it except for limitation of time, is the progression that was necessary to get to the scientific Apollo 15 with Mercury going. Then Gemini, can we rejoin? Can we get together? Apollo 15.
Gemini, the Mercury program was established to do certain things, like one, can we get a guy in space and bring him back alive? Two, can we go into orbit around the Earth? Number three, how long can we stay up there? Those kinds of things we did in Mercury. But when Gemini came along, now they really focused on perfecting all the techniques we're going to need if we are in fact going to the moon on a protocol called Lunar Orbit Rendezvous. There were all kinds of different ways. We could have done Earth orbit rendezvous. We could have done direct landing. But the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous technique was the one that was established, and probably the most efficient in the end. Anyway,
This is what Buzz Aldrin worked out, wasn't it? Wasn't he instrumental in working out the rejoining procedures?
He had written his thesis
Right.
at MIT on rendezvous, and he was called kind of Mr. Rendezvous. So I'm sure he had an input to it, yeah.
And the way you actually rendezvous.
But I don't think he was the one who decided that's what we're going to do.
So, but the actual rendezvous procedures, having driven cars on freeways and driven jets in the air or whatever, if you want to catch up with somebody, you just push the throttle up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work in space.
It does not work. If you do that, you're not gonna do yourself any good.
What's it do?
Well, if you add velocity, let's say you're in orbit and you're behind somebody, and you add velocity, what's going to happen is it's going to raise your orbit
Okay.
180 degrees out.
Right.
So if you want to catch up with somebody, you actually have to slow down.
But then
That puts you in a lower orbit, which you go in a lower orbit and you overtake the vehicle that's in the higher orbit. So as you get close to it, then you have to add velocity to come up to the same altitude.
And so when you actually, the procedure you guys used was different because in previous missions.
Well, we didn't have to do any of that. Because Dave came right up into the same orbit that I was
Right,
in.
and previous missions, what they did is they had to, well, let's see, I can't remember exactly.
I think I'm not sure. Originally, it was this. The LEM would go into a lower orbit behind the command module and gradually catch up. You get to a certain point, and you add velocity, and you know exactly how much to add to bring you right up behind them in the same orbit.
But you being the command module pilot, you're actually doing the rejoin because the other guys are having to stand and look straight up in the air to control the path.
Well, it's even more than that. When they come back into orbit, they're flying a machine that's down to about 2,500 pounds.
Oh boy.
And they still got the RCS control, the reaction control system, that's designed for the whole lunar module of 37,000 pounds. So every time they touch a reaction control, they're really bouncing around.
Yeah.
So
what are the controls? What shoots out of them?
Well, they were just like in the command module. There's a translation control.
No, I mean the actual product that comes out of the spacecraft.
You mean out of the reaction control system?
Is it a hydrogen peroxide or what is the?
No, I'm not sure. I know in a command module on the reaction control system and the command module for reentry was hypergolic.
Oh, really?
And I'm forgetting now. Red fuming nitric acid was one of them, and I forget what the other was.
That's kind of dangerous stuff to be carrying around.
Dangerous stuff, yeah.
So that's why you had to dump everything once you got down in the ocean.
Exactly. That could be the same thing, but I'm not. I don't think I'm not sure what the lunar module had. I couldn't tell you.
So big.
But the point was that for them to try and maintain an attitude was tough because they were just jittering. Because every time they hit a thruster, it really bounced them. So now I was in a command module, and we still were up to I don't know how many thousands of pounds. So my thrusters, if I touched a thruster, I get a little bit of motion. So I was basically had the smooth vehicle to fly, and Dave got it down, got the motion down in the ascent stage as best he could, and I went in and did the docking.
And when the thing walks, then they have. Well, I guess you're both pressurized, but you probably have to equal the pressure. And they come back in. I guess you guys are glad to see each other at that point.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
And what was it you guys?
Had to make them go back and get cleaned up a little bit. But
what was that? What was it that you guys like to drink? Some vodka or whatever that was?
Oh, well, that was me. I had a deal with my geology guys that whenever we went on a geology field trip, we took a bottle of Oso Negro.
There you go.
And there was a big joke during the flight that we couldn't get any Oso Negro on the flight.
So, I have a million questions I can ask. But anyway, I want to save time for Dylan here. But here, I think this is cool. Okay.
All right, you're on.
When they're on, well, hold on a minute. So they're sitting on the moon, right? Now, the LEM, the thing that landed on the moon, is a two-stage. There's two pieces to it. There's one part that sits on the moon. It's going to stay there. And the other part is going to separate and go up because it's got its own rocket in it. That's what we were just talking about. But at that time, the Major here did something they probably didn't count on him doing. He played some music.
Oh, yes. Was that one of your questions?
That's one of my questions.
Well, that's one of yours. I played the Air Force song. We were all three Air Force guys. I thought that since they'd been walking around on the moon for 3 days, they ought to be reminded that they were in the Air Force. So I played the Air Force song while they were getting ready to launch off the moon. But I played it for Mission Control. I didn't expect them to get it. And what happened is the guy in Mission Control had flipped the switch, and they were getting it in their headset.
It's that
which did not make
the wild blue
which did not make David very happy.
But later he was happy with it.
Well, yeah, later he took credit for it. So.
Dylan, this is Dylan Meadows, and Dylan's older brother was here when we interviewed Joe Engel. And so I had his class prepare some questions.
Sure.
And ready, set, go, Dylan.
What you got, Dylan?
Oh, what was going through your mind when you're taking off?
Not much of anything. When we were getting countdown for the launch, Jim, Irwin, and I got a little sleep. They had to wake us up about 15 minutes before launch. I wasn't thinking about anything, really. I was just waiting for it to go and kind of getting excited, and it was fun. But I don't remember thinking about anything except keeping my eyes on the instruments that I had to watch, making sure that we were in the right track.
Do you trust everyone in the spaceship?
Did I trust everyone? Absolutely.
You did?
You trust them with your life, anybody in that spacecraft. And you also trust everybody in mission control the same way. They're a long ways away, but they can sure as heck have a big influence on what you do.
Mm-hmm. What was more scary, taking off or landing?
Gee, somebody asked me that same question. They're about the same. I think in terms of how scary they are, when you take off, you realize that you got millions and millions of pounds of fuel on board that could explode. Mm-hmm. And when you come back down, you got 3 parachutes you got to rely on. We actually lost 1 parachute on our way down, and so that made the landing a little scarier. The system was designed for 2 chutes, so we were okay there. But as we were touching down, I saw the 2nd chute start to fail. So it was a good thing we got down when we did. So I would say, in terms of how you feel about it and what's scary, it's pretty much the same. Those are the two big events of a flight, is the landing, or the takeoff and the landing.
Yeah. Was it hard to like eat and drink?
It's a lot easier than you might think. It's pretty much like down here. It's just that we had to be conscious that there was no gravity acting on the food, so if you let go of it, it's going to float around. If it's a liquid, you got to be kind of careful, because you don't want to let any of that liquid get behind an instrument panel, because it could start short-circuiting things. But I think it was pretty much like eating down here. Actually, not that bad.
What did the moon look like from up there?
The front side of the moon is very different from the back side. Front side's got big dark circles on it that we call the kind of the face of the man in the moon.
Yeah.
Those are all created by meteor impacts long time ago in history. The back side of the moon has a lot of small craters, but none of the big ones. So it's quite different from the front side. The meteors, if you've ever wondered why we always see one face of the moon, we don't ever see the backside, it's because when those meteors hit the moon, they left a lot of mass under the surface on one side, and then the Earth's gravity forced the moon to rotate to the point where that offset gravity stabilized, and that's why we only see one side of the moon.
I'm glad you answered. Someone asked me that, and I had no idea.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's an offset gravity situation.
But the moon actually lags in its orbit, doesn't it? Sort of fall behind it.
It's about a 1.5 degree wobble. It's not much.
Are the equators parallel?
You know, I never thought about that. I don't know.
Do all the planets spin the same way?
No. I'm thinking, I don't know that much about them, but I'm thinking there's at least one planet that spins the other way.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dylan.
You done?
Yeah.
That's it? Okay. Let me ask some more questions.
All right, one more, and then I gotta go.
Okay. Flashes. Light flashes.
Light flashes. Those are cosmic particles that kind of slice through everything. And this has been an ongoing investigation in space, because we want to find out if they're really going to cause a problem on a 1.5-year flight going to Mars. What we did is we put on blinders on the way out and on the way back, and we reported to Mission Control any light flashes that we saw. And what we would say is left to right, or 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock, or something like that.
And everybody saw the same thing?
No. Just individuals would see it. Jim would see something different than me than Dave, because these are just very tiny particles. If they happen to hit both of us, yeah. But basically, you got your own light flashes.
So when you were after you did your spacewalk and collected the materials, then you just basically had time off for a couple of days. There was not a lot to do besides clean the place up and get ready.
Well, not exactly, because I was very busy all the way home. I had to deal with Mission Control that I would do my own navigation through the system that we had. And I don't know whether you know what the system is, but mission control formulates what they call a state vector. A state vector is 3 components of location, 3 components of velocity, and then time. So you've got 7 factors that go into a state vector, which identifies where you are, what direction you're going, and how fast you're going, at what time. And they do that through radio telescope measuring. They got an angle, and they got a distance, and a relative speed. We had very small computers, you know, that we could take. We only had 75K of memory on our flight, and they couldn't put all the programs in a computer. So the one they took out was called Return to Earth, which we thought was kind of interesting. Didn't like that very much. But because of that, I got to thinking one day about what would happen if we go to Mars and we lose all radios. How does the crew get back? So I made a deal with Mission Control. If I could stay within their state vector ellipse, see what you develop a state vector and then you forecast it forward. And as you forecast it forward, all the uncertainties begin to make it gets bigger. The state vector gets bigger and bigger. In other words, you're not as certain of where you are. So periodically during the flight, they would reinitiate your state vector, which would bring you back down to a point. And I said, you know, I want to do that on my own, because if we have a problem going to Mars, we've got to figure out a way to get back home.
But, question. You said when you were on the dark side, the back side of the moon, when it was completely dark, and you looked up at the sky.
Whoa. Backside completely dark?
And when you were on the other side, away from the Earth.
Backside.
When it was completely dark.
No. Why do you say completely dark?
Because you were looking out into space away from the moon. And you
The
said,
dark side of the moon's away from the sun.
Right.
The backside's away from the Earth.
Right.
Backside was not dark.
Okay, well the site where it was the darkest, when you were in complete darkness.
Was off about 10 o'clock. If you were to look at the moon, at about 10 o'clock, where I was shadowed from both the Earth and the sun.
And?
It's on a small pie-shaped wedge.
And when you looked up in the sky, what you saw was?
Zillions of stars. Zillions.
So, but I think you said in the book it was so hard to tell what star was which. How would you navigate in a situation like that?
Oh, the computer knew. I kept doing it often enough so the computer had a pretty good handle on it. On the way back home, that wasn't a factor because we were out of that dark side of the moon.
Right.
And the sun was out there, so I could still, now we're back to normal star pattern.
Just thinking in terms of, 2 trillion galaxies out there, which we didn't know at that time, but now we...
Well, it's like there are 400 billion stars in our Milky Way, and there are 200 billion galaxies out there. And in fact, 10 years ago, if you'd asked an astronomer how many universes there are out there, he'd think you were crazy. Oh, there's only one.
Yeah.
Now, they will say, we're not sure.
More than a few.
Yeah.